All right, go.
Hi, everyone. This is the replication project completed by the East Coast group. We will all introduce ourselves to begin. So to start, I'm Ashley Seip.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Piper.
Hi, I'm Jessica Swanson.
Hi, I'm Brianna Olden.
Hello, I'm Justin Kelly.
Okay, so the study that we chose to replicate was conducted by Andrew R. Craig from West Virginia University. This study was published in 2010, and Craig looked into using self-managed behavior modification programs in order to reduce habitual behaviors, such as nail biting. He used procedures such as self-monitoring and differential reinforcement, and by using these, he was able to successfully reduce the occurrences of nail biting. So as a group, we all kind of discussed and talked about the idea that nail biting or object mouthing, so putting things up to our mouth, was something that we saw that a lot of us did during working hours. So we thought that this project would definitely suit our needs well for replication. And we hoped that we could see the same results that Craig had found by using this very simple procedure to decrease this habit of ours. So there is some supporting literature that kind of backs this up that he used in his study. Past research has shown that certain habitual habits can be modified by the use of self-monitoring procedures. A study done by Chrisman and Somner looked into how specifically nail biting could be reduced by using self-monitoring strategies. And while the study we replicated used a similar procedure, the study we replicated actually took it a step further by incorporating differential reinforcement in hopes to reinforce appropriate behaviors and also decrease these inappropriate behaviors. A study completed by Kasdan and Bootson also contributed to research by showing that having a tangible reinforcer, so this would be something like a token system, has a lot more advantages over generalized conditioned reinforcers, and these would be things such as like societal praise and approval. So because of this, the current study that we used a self-monitoring procedure coupled with the reinforcement system that allowed you to cash in at the end of a leisure activity based on your preference assessment. They believed that while societal judgment about nail biting can have an effect, a stronger way to manage behavior would be to provide direct access to something that is a reinforcing preferred activity when the behavior didn't happen. They compiled all of this past research into the study that we decided to replicate in order to show if these techniques really can have an impact on decreasing habitual behaviors.
All right. So the purpose of this study was to use self-monitoring systems and self-management, as well as differential reinforcement token systems, in order to treat the problematic nature of nail biting. Our group decided to add object mouthing as well because we agreed that not only do some of us have the tendency to bite our nails, but we also tend to put things in our mouths like writing utensils, clothing, other things just mindlessly. And in order to include everybody in the group in our study, it was appropriate to add object mouthing. So in order to treat the problematic nature of nail biting and object mouthing, like I said, we combined self-management and differential reinforcement. Mostly we thought it was appropriate to replicate this as a group because nail biting and object mouthing are both behaviors that can be socially unacceptable in a lot of settings and are something that a lot of people do but don't really realize when they do it. So the participants were each of the people in the group. So there was 5 individuals, all enrolled in graduate school. The setting was different for each individual. So during baseline and before, we had all monitored our nail biting and object mouthing throughout the day in a variety of settings. And then the setting that each of us individually thought we had the most occurrences was selected. However, a couple of us identified in the car or driving as the setting in which we had the most occurrences of nail biting and object mouthing. So we took that out of the equation, and we therefore reverted to like doing schoolwork or doing something at the table. So each individual had a different setting, and then data was collected in whichever setting that individual identified, and it was kept consistent for the duration of the study. The materials used were a timer, a writing utensil, paper, camera so we could take photos of nails and writing utensils, a recording device so we could record sessions to calculate inter-observer agreement, and technology and internet access to share data and recording with the group.
All right, so now I'm going to talk about the behavioral definition that we had for nail biting and object mouthing. So we defined nail biting as any instance of the fingers at or past the plane of our lips until complete removal of the fingers from the lips for at least 3 seconds. And that was for nail biting. For object mouthing, it was any instance of a non-edible object. So that would be something like a marker, a pen, clothing even, coming into contact with our lips until removal of contact from the lips. And this excluded items that would normally contact the lips, things like chapstick, gum, straw, food, anything like that. That would be excluded from the object mouthing definition. The design of the study that we used was an AB-AB reversal. The baseline phase A consisted of self-monitoring, and the treatment phase B consisted of self-monitoring plus the DRO, which we'll get to in a little bit. For data collection, each instance of nail biting or object mouthing was tallied throughout each session for baseline, DRO, the reversal, and then when we went back to our DRO. The total number of behavior instances per session were graphed in order to conduct a visual analysis, and we'll show that a little bit later, our individual results. So DRO, this is how we handled this. At the end of the baseline phase, each participant collected between 5 and 7 sessions of data, indicating every instance of nail biting or object mouthing or both. We calculated the average number of responses with the nail biting or object by adding the number of nail bites each session and then dividing it by the total number of sessions. Then we took the DRO interval, and that was calculated by dividing the mean number of responses by the mean duration of days or sessions, when that was 1 hour. And I will go ahead and show you the calculation on that, so it makes a little more sense. All right, so for instance, the total number of occurrences over the duration of X sessions divided by X sessions, because some of us had 5 days of baseline data, some of us had 6, some of us had 7. So in this numerical example here at the bottom, if we had 21 occurrences over the 7 sessions, we divide that, which averaged out to be 3 instances. And then our session where we actually performed the nail biting or not was 60 minutes session divided by 3, which would be 20 minutes, or that would be our 20-minute DRO. And each of us had a different number, and we'll get to that in just a second. So if we did not have any instances during that session, we received a token, and the tokens were exchanged after the session for leisure activities. And those leisure activities were determined through a preference assessment, and we were able to redeem those tokens after we had our DRO photos confirmed by another group member, and we will also get to that in just a second. So the way we conducted the preference assessment was an informal assessment that we each did during baseline. Each individual monitored the duration, which we engaged in leisure activities during awake hours, and then we documented them. So that would be activities that were outside of things that we had to do, like taking care of ourselves, eating, homework, sleeping, things like that. Some examples of things that did include were things like watching TV, playing games, extended exercise, maybe taking a hike or something like that, socializing, reading non-academic materials, and other hobbies and interests. And here is in some samples of our informal preference assessments that some of us conducted to figure out what we would work for with our tokens.
So baseline was conducted next, and each member conducted an initial baseline for a total of 5 to 7 days. Group member self-measurements of nail biting or object mouthing. And for this phase, pictures were not required. DRO implemented. After a DRO phase, individuals returned to baseline for 5 to 6 days, depending on the stability of data. For both phases, data was uploaded to a shared document and utilized for graphing and visual analysis purposes that we'll see later on. For IOA, or Inter-Observer Agreement, each individual recorded themselves depending on the phase they were incorporated in. For baseline, it was recorded for a total duration of 15 minutes, and while treatment phases were recorded for a total of 30 minutes per time. Each video recording was shared with the group, and a designated group member was randomly assigned to review the video and conduct IOA data. Videos were then broken down into 5-minute intervals, and IOA was calculated by using interval-by-interval IOA methods. To calculate the IOA, the number of intervals in which data collectors agreed upon was divided by the total amount of average and then multiplied by 100. So, for instance, were agreed upon during which object mouthing or nail biting occurred or didn't occur. 5 intervals possible, that would equal an 80% inter-observer agreement. The next slide is an image of our treatment integrity checklist, which I will explain next. So treatment integrity was conducted by each member once per phase for a total of 4 times. Each member was required to review the checklist and ensure whether or not the steps were implemented throughout the phase. Of phase verified steps was then calculated and divided by the total steps and multiplied by 100. So, for example, steps divided by 10 total steps would be 80% treatment integrity. If it fell below 80, training was recommended. Phase, and at the end of the phases, each total was added up and then multiplied by 4 phases, and the overall percentage of treatment fidelity was calculated to represent the total percentage throughout the replication of the study. For the DRO photos, each participant was required to take photos of their hands to ensure that the replication was implemented correctly. Photos were also taken of objects as well as nails. Photos could potentially be mouthed before and after each session during DRO. Have 2 different sets of photos at least. In instance of nail biting or object mouthing, participants were required to take a photo of the object or their nails. At the end of each session, photos were uploaded to a group document to be verified by another group member. Verified the accurate DRO, the participant the token and utilize it for their leisure activity.
Now that we have explained the process of how we replicated our study, we will each show you our individual data and graphs. So mine will be up first. So my graph will be shared on the screen for you to see. And this will show you the data that I collected over the course of the study. So as you can see here, I have much more variation in my nail biting and object mouthing, which for me is more object mouthing than nail biting, during my baselines than I had during either of my DRO intervals. So as you can see, both of my baselines both have like much higher instances and stuff. And then once we did interventions, mine kind of flattened out. So my data is on the side for my treatment fidelity was 97%, and this was due to the lack of always posting pictures on time. I found that aspect to be a little challenging to remember that, oh, I need to upload my picture now. So there were a couple instances of times that I missed that. And my IOA was 100%, so this leads to the conclusion that the data I collected should be pretty reliable. The next slide has all of my averages and ranges for each my baselines and DROs. So during my first baseline phase, I ranged between 0 and 3 nail bites and object mouths, which led me to an average of 1.7. This decreased to an average of 0.4 when DRO was implemented, with my range decreasing to only between 0 and 1. After returning to baseline, my range of 0 to 3 also returned, and that led me to an average of 1.6, so pretty similar to my first baseline. When we went to second DRO, I had 0 instances of nail biting, and this led to a range of 0 with an average of 0.
All right. For me, I had 7 sessions of initial baseline data, and then I had 5 sessions of DRO, followed by 5 sessions returning to baseline and 5 sessions DRO. So my data looks as follows. So as you can see, I didn't have too many occurrences of nail biting or object mouthing in baseline, but I did have 1 to 3 during all baseline and return to baseline. During DRO, there was only 1 instance in 1 session, and then otherwise there were no instances of either nail biting or object mouthing. My inter-observer agreement was calculated to be 100%, meaning that my data that I collected matched exactly with the other person that was assigned to look at my video. The treatment fidelity following the checklist that you saw on the screen a little bit ago did calculate to be 100%. So hopefully the data is reliable. So as I said, I had 7 sessions of initial baseline, and the range was 1 to 3 with an average of 2. So my DRO intervals were 30 minutes. The initial DRO, I had 5 sessions. There was a range of 0 to 1 occurrence, and then the average was 0.2. Return to baseline, the range was 1 to 3 occurrence per session, and the average was 2. And then DRO was 0, and then the average per phase was 0 as well.
Okay, and we can go over my individual results that I had, and I only engaged in nail biting, so that was the only data that I recorded. And in just a second, we'll see my graph so we can see how I did with that. So during baseline, I had a pretty stable trend of biting my nails anywhere between 2 and 3 times for the 7 sessions. The DRO, I only had 1 instance of nail biting in the first session there between sessions 8 and 13. And then return to baseline, again, nail biting continued between 2 and 3 instances across those sessions. And then we went back to DRO again. I didn't have any instances of nail biting. My IOA was calculated at 96%, so we can assume that the data is pretty reliable. And my treatment fidelity was at 100%. So the next thing we'll talk about is kind of break down the range and average for each phase. So my baseline, which was the first 7 sessions, I had anywhere between 2 and 3 instances of nail biting, or an average of 2.71. And then for DRO, sessions 8 to 12, I had 0 to 1 range of nail biting, which was an average of 0.2. Return to baseline, 13 to 17 session, 2 to 3 instances of nail biting again, or average of 2.6. And then for the final 18 to 22 sessions for DRO, I had no instances. So the average was 0 and the range was 0 to 0.
All right, so next I will present my individual data. First off, I will start with the average and range. Did a total of 7 sessions for my baseline, which was 0 to 2, with an average per phase of 1, or per session. The 8 through 12 was the DRO, and for that there was a range of 0 and an average of 0. In 18, which is return to baseline, the range was 0 to 2, but the average was only 0.67. And sessions 19 to 23, the return to DRO, the range and average were both 0. And then if we look at my graph, see that I had from 0 to 2 of nail biting, and even between the baseline and return to baseline, there was a large difference from the average of 1 to 0.67, and in each DRO phase there was no instances of nail biting. The treatment fidelity of 100%, and the IOA is also 100%, so we can assume that the data is fairly accurate.
Okay, now I will talk about my individual data. If you're looking at my chart, you can see that actually during my first DRO session, I had the most amount of nail biting as opposed to any of the baselines. That after returning to baseline and then going to DRO again, it significantly increased or decreased. So my treatment fidelity ended up being 90%, and my IOA ended up being 95%. So we can tell that the data is pretty reliable. Next, we'll look at my range and the average for the phases. For my first baseline, for sessions 1 to 7, I had between 1 and 4 occurrences of nail biting. So an average was 2.57. For sessions 8 through 12, first DRO, I had between 3 and 5 occurrences, which was an average of 4.2. For sessions 13 through 18, which was return to baseline, the range was 0 to 3, and the average was 1.17. And finally, 19 through 23, the second DRO was from 0 to 2, and the average was 1.2. So by the end, the nail biting had decreased. Okay, now we're going to talk about the conclusions that we had from our study. We can tell that just by looking at all the different data graphs, charts, that our data was relatively similar. We had a few differences, but overall, we saw the same trend of the reduction in nail biting over the course of the study. And we had a few limitations to the study. One of the limitations was the difficulties, the use of videoing of the IOA set some limits because sometimes it was hard to distinguish if the finger crossed the plane of the mouth or not. In the case that you just couldn't tell, it had to be assumed that it did not cross since it obviously couldn't be determined. Another limitation was the length of session times. In the original study, the occurrences were recorded all day, and we couldn't do this for our replication just due to time restraints. So we reduced it to 1 hour a day, and we just reduced it to 1 hour a day. Another limitation is the DRO and the pictures or the photos. We felt that the DRO might not have controlled the behavior. The photo taking aspect of the replication seemed more to act maybe as a punishment. So we kind of felt that the photos might have controlled the behavior a little bit more than what the DRO might have.
All right, so again, we'll go through all the contributors.
So I'm Ashley Stipe.
I'm Emily Piper.
I'm Brianna Olden.
And I'm Justin Kelly.
All right, thank you for watching. And here are our references. Thanks again.